Hello everybody. In this video we're going to talk about the exercises for Chapter 13 of Price Analysis, a Fundamental Approach to the Study of Commodity Prices. This week we're going to put ourselves in the role of risk manager for a commercial soybean crushing facility. And we're going to suppose that at our facility we crush 50,000 bushels of soybean per month. Now I've attached here a CSV file which has some prices that are forward prices for July, August, September, and October deliveries in 2017. And we're going to take a look at those forward curves, and we're basically going to say to ourselves, okay, the price that I see on the first date, do I think any of those expirations, gross processing margins are good enough that I want to go ahead and hedge them or lock in my prices at that date? So let's go ahead and open up this CSV file. Take a look at what we're dealing with. Okay, and notice what we have here. We have just a few dates, and the assignment is saying, all right, take a look at the prices here on July 3rd and pretend like these are the prices on the futures forward curve that we're looking at. And I've given us August, September, and November beans. August, September, and December meal, and August, September, and December oil. For each of these commodities, I've also given us a basis, soybean meal basis and bean basis. And if you recall back to our flour mill example from Chapter 4, we abstracted away from uncertainty in the basis, and we just had it fixed at a certain constant number. But that's definitely not true in the real world. The basis will fluctuate on you as you're trying to manage risk. So in this example, we're going to have a fluctuating basis, and we'll try to think about how that's going to affect us when we're trying to hedge gross processing margin as a crusher. So let's tab back to the book. So here we are back at the textbook, and I've reminded us here what kind of yield assumptions we're assuming in the soybean crushing process. So again, we're going to assume that if we crush 1 bushel of soybean, we'll get 11 pounds of oil and 44 pounds of meal. And that's going to impact our per bushel profit calculation. So what we call the gross processing margin is going to be the revenue from selling oil and meal minus the cost of purchasing soybeans. Now breaking this down a little bit further, I've taken the price of oil divided by 100 because the data vendors that we use provide prices of soybean oil in cents per pound, and I would prefer to make this margin in dollars rather than cents. So we're going to divide that price by 100, and we're going to multiply that times 11 because for every bushel of soybeans we crush, we're going to get 11 pounds of oil. So that's times 11. Basically comes from here. The other part of our revenue is going to be from selling soybean meal, and the tricky thing about this price is that it's in dollars per ton. That's why we're dividing by the 2,000 here to get it into dollars per pound. And then we are able to just multiply this times 44 because we know we get 44 pounds from 1 bushel. So this altogether, this term will give us the revenue from selling soybean meal that was created from 1 bushel of soybeans. Then simply for the cost, we're just going to subtract off the cost of soybeans per bushel, and that's going to be the price of soybeans per bushel. And here we're just dividing by 100 because again, our data vendor gives us prices in cents per bushel rather than dollars per bushel. Okay, so now let's notice what the instructions say to do for number 1. We're going to focus on July 3rd, and we're going to go and create new column headers in columns N, O, and P. We're going to call them August gross processing margin, September gross processing margin, and October gross processing margin. So let's go do that. Aug GPM. Okay, we have our column headers ready. Now the next thing to do for number 1 is to compute the forward gross processing margin. So let's go back to the spreadsheet and do that. So you might want to make a copy of this or write it down because we're going to be using this equation when we go back to the Excel spreadsheet. Alright, so let's start computing those gross processing margins. And actually, I'm going to see if I can grab this equation. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad. So that'll help us remember. So August gross processing margin should be computed by just following this formula and putting in the August prices that we have. So this would be our expected gross processing margin in August. And since we have some basis, we can add those basis in there. Now, the reality is the way this is presented, it's like we can see the basis in August for beans is -20, and we'll just assume that that basis will persist into August. If we have some reason to make another expectation, either higher or lower for August, and we were trying to forecast our own gross processing margin for August based on this forward curve, then we would put our own estimate in for basis. But we're going to either pretend like this is our estimate for basis, or this is the actual basis in July, and we think it's going to remain constant. So that means we're going to start out with the oil term. I'm going to make a parenthesis. I'm going to go and get the August oil price. And I'm going to do a plus the basis. Since I've already got the minuses on there, we'll just do that with a plus. So that indicates that the cash price we can sell oil for is 3 cents below the August futures price that's presented on the board. Alright, so now according to our formula, we need to divide by 100 to get it into dollars per pound, and we need to multiply by 11 because that's how many pounds of oil we get from 1 bushel of soybeans. So that's that term. Let's move along. Plus the price of meal. I'm going to make a parenthesis there. August meal is here. Add the term for basis to get our cash price equivalent. And now note, we're going to say times 44 divided by 2,000. And that should give us our second revenue term. Alright, so now we just need to subtract our soybean price. So you're going to want to do a minus and a parenthesis. And get your soybean price. Add the basis to it. Divide by 100 to get it into dollars per bushel. And this should do it. Okay, so the August gross processing margin you should get is 51 cents. If you saw a different number there, it was because I had some old basis values that weren't working out very well. Your basis numbers should look like these here. This, and this, and this. Alright, so this is going to calculate our gross processing margin for us. We could almost be able to just drag this formula across to get September and October, and we would be happy that this value would copy over to September for our September GPM. Same for this August going to Sep, and the August beans going to Sep. But we want these basis values to stay the same because we're going to use these expectations for basis for all of these things. So that means we need to put some dollar signs in our basis values in the formula. And particularly we want the column to not change. So I'm going to put a column before the J, and before the F, and before the B. Basically before each of those basis values I put a dollar sign. Then when I drag my formula to the right, then it will keep those basis references fixed. So see here, the basis values stayed the same, and all of the price references moved into the September column. So now we've got information that the soybean crusher could use to ask themselves, okay, I'm sitting here on July 3rd. Would I like to hedge and lock in my August processing margin at 51 cents per bushel, or September at 53, or October at 58? Okay, and there may be a variety of reasons why you think that's a good margin or a bad margin. We know from class, at least as of fall of 2017, they're currently getting around $1 per bushel, so this doesn't look great. But suppose that the crusher says to themselves, okay, we're just going to hedge it and make sure we get at least 51 cents per bushel. Let's go ahead and lock in our August production. So we're going to make some trades that does that. And we'll continue that with in the next video.